Thros stood on the bridge of the Star Whisper, watching the stars through the main viewing screen. His scaled hands moved across the control panel with practiced ease. The Vetharian officer had been on patrol duty for 3 months now, checking the Outer Rim territories for anything unusual. So far, nothing interesting had happened. "Sir, we have something on the long-range sensors," called out Lieutenant Vextar from the scanning station. "It looks like a ship, but the design is unknown to our databases." Thros walked over to look at the readings. The ship was large, maybe 3 kilometers long, but it moved slowly through space. Its energy signature was weak, and the hull seemed to be made of simple metal alloys. How primitive, he thought to himself. "Signal Captain Velthar," Thros ordered. "Tell him we have found something worth investigating." Within minutes, Captain Velthar arrived on the bridge. He was a tall Vetharian with dark green scales and silver markings that showed his high rank. His yellow eyes studied the sensor data carefully. "A new species?" the captain said with interest. "And they appear to be refugees of some kind. Look at those life signs. There are thousands of them packed into that ship." The alien vessel had noticed them too. A communication signal came through their systems. The voice that spoke was strange, softer than Vetharian voices, without the natural growl that all proper warriors should have. "This is Captain Ji-Ho Kim of the colony ship New Seoul. We are peaceful travelers seeking safe passage through this region. Please identify yourselves." Captain Velthar smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "This is Captain Velthar of the Vetharian Confederation. You are in our protected space now, little humans. We offer you safety and guidance in exchange for cooperation and resource sharing." Thros had seen this many times before. The Vetharians were the strongest military force in this part of the galaxy. When they offered protection, it was not really a choice. Most species understood this quickly and accepted the arrangement without trouble. "We would be grateful for your protection," came the human response. "Permission to come aboard and discuss terms?" "Granted," Captain Velthar replied. "Thros, you will handle the negotiations. Learn what you can about their technology and capabilities." An hour later, Thros found himself in the shuttle bay, watching as a small human craft docked with their ship. The humans who emerged were much smaller than Vetharians, with pale skin and no natural armor. They wore simple uniforms that looked more like work clothes than military gear. The leader was a human who introduced himself as Captain Ji-Ho Kim. He was average height for his species, with black hair and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. With him came 3 others, a female called Sumi Park, who appeared to be their engineer, a quiet male named Daeho Lee, who was their security chief, and another female called Minji Choi, who was their medical officer. "Your ship is impressive," Ji-Ho said as they walked through the corridors of the Star Whisper. "We have never seen technology like this before." Thros felt pleased. It was always good when primitive species recognized Vetharian superiority right away. "The Confederation has been exploring space for over 2,000 years, he explained. "We have learned much about warfare and survival among the stars." "Warfare?" Sumi asked, her voice curious. "Is there much conflict in this region?" "Of course," Thros replied. "Space is dangerous. There are pirates, raiders, and hostile empires everywhere. That is why smaller species need our protection." He noticed that the humans exchanged quick glances when he mentioned this, but they said nothing. The negotiations took place in the main conference room. The terms were standard. The humans would share their technological data and provide raw materials when requested. In return, the Vetharians would protect them from threats and help them find a suitable world to colonize. "This seems very generous," Ji-Ho said after reading through the agreement. "What exactly do you expect from us in terms of military support?" Thros was confused by the question. "Military support? You are refugees with an old, slow ship. We do not expect you to fight. That is what the protection agreement is for." I see, Jiho said. He signed the documents without further questions. After the humans left, Captain Velthar called Kyle Thros to his private office. "What do you think of them?" the captain asked. "They seem intelligent but weak," Kyle Thros replied honestly. "Their ship is large but poorly armed. I detected only basic defensive systems and some primitive projectile weapons. They will not be any trouble to manage." "Good," Captain Velthar said. "I am assigning you as liaison officer. You will spend time on their ship, monitoring their activities and making sure they follow the agreement. Also, see if you can learn anything useful from their technology. Sometimes primitive species have interesting ideas." The next day, Kyle Thros moved to temporary quarters aboard the new Soul. The human ship was crowded but well organized. Families lived in small compartments, and everyone seemed to have a job to do. Children attended classes while adults worked, in various departments throughout the ship. What impressed Kyle Thros most was how efficiently everything ran. Captain Jiho managed 50,000 people with calm authority. There were no fights, no arguments, and no signs of the chaos that usually came with large refugee populations. Sumi Park showed him around the engineering sections. Her knowledge was remarkable, and she asked many intelligent questions about Vetharian technology. Within days, she had made improvements to their life support systems that increased efficiency by 15%. Daeho Lee was harder to understand. The security chief was polite but quiet. He ran regular drills with his security teams, practicing movements and procedures that seemed unnecessary. After all, what threats could there be inside a refugee ship under Vetharian protection? "It is good to stay prepared," Daeho explained when Kyle Thros asked about the drills. "Old habits, you understand." Minji Choi worked in the medical sections, treating everything from minor injuries to serious illnesses. She was skilled and dedicated, often working long hours without complaint. The humans clearly trusted her completely. As weeks passed, Kyle Thros found himself growing to respect these strange creatures. They were not warriors like the Vetharians, but they were survivors. They adapted quickly to new situations and worked together with impressive coordination. Their technology was indeed primitive compared to Vetharian standards, but it was reliable and well-designed. Their weapons were simple chemical explosives and metal projectiles, but they maintained them with care. Their defensive systems were basic energy shields and armor plating, but everything was kept in perfect working order. Most importantly, they caused no trouble. They followed the protection agreement exactly, sharing data and resources as requested. They asked few questions and seemed genuinely grateful for Vetharian guidance. Kyle Thros began to think this assignment would be easy. The humans were peaceful, cooperative, and harmless. What could go wrong with such a simple species? He had no idea that everything he believed about humans was about to change forever. 3 months had passed since the humans joined the Vetharian protection fleet, and Kyle Thros had settled into a comfortable routine aboard the new Soul. Every morning, he would review security reports with Daeho Lee, check engineering progress with Sumi Park, and attend the daily briefing with Captain Jiho Kim. The humans continued to amaze him with their organization. Despite living in cramped conditions, they maintained perfect order. Children attended school in converted cargo bays, while adults worked in shifts to keep the ship running smoothly. There were no complaints, no protests, and no signs of the stress that usually affected refugee populations. "Your people are very disciplined," Kyle Thros told Jiho during one of their morning meetings. Most species would be fighting each other by now in these conditions. Jiho smiled, but something in his expression seemed distant. "We have had practice living in difficult situations. Humans are good at adapting when we have to." Kyle Thros nodded, though he did not fully understand what Jiho meant. The humans never talked much about their past or why they had left their home world. When asked, They would give simple answers about seeking new opportunities among the stars. The security. Drills continued every day. Daiho would lead groups of humans through exercises that involved moving quickly through the ship, setting up defensive positions, and practicing with their primitive weapons. Kyle Thros often watched these drills with amusement. "What exactly are you preparing for?" he asked Daiho one afternoon. "The Vetharian fleet protects you from all external threats." Daiho adjusted the simple projectile weapon he was cleaning. "It is always good to be ready for anything. You never know what might happen in space." The human security teams moved with strange precision during their exercises. They communicated with hand signals and short phrases, working together like they had been training for years. Their weapons were loud and crude compared to Vetharian energy rifles, but the humans maintained them with religious care. Kael'thros noticed that the humans had divided their ship into sections with blast doors and independent life support systems. When he asked Sumi about this, she explained it was for safety during emergencies. "If we lose main power or have a hull breach, each section can operate alone," she said while showing him the engineering controls. "It keeps everyone alive longer." It made sense, but Kael'thros wondered why they had built such an elaborate system. Most refugee ships had basic life support and simple layouts. The new Sol was designed like a fortress, with backup systems for backup systems. Sumi had been learning from the Vetharian technology database that Captain Velthar had shared with them. Her progress was remarkable. She understood advanced concepts quickly and asked questions that showed deep thinking about how different systems work together. "Your people seem very interested in defensive technologies," Kael'thros observed while watching her study shield generator designs. "Defense is important when you are far from home," Sumi replied without looking up from her work. "We want to be able to protect ourselves if something goes wrong." Minji Choi ran medical drills as often as Daiho ran security exercises. She trained teams of humans to handle mass casualties, practice emergency surgery, and treat injuries under difficult conditions. The medical bays had been expanded far beyond what a normal refugee ship would need. "Do you expect many injuries?" Kael'thros asked her during one training session. "Hope for the best, prepare for the worst," Minji said while showing a group how to stop heavy bleeding. "Medical preparedness saves lives." The children attended classes where they learned normal subjects like mathematics and science, but Kael'thros noticed they also studied things like resource management, crisis response, and what the teachers called situational awareness. Even the youngest humans were taught to notice details about their environment and think about potential problems. "Your education system is very thorough," Kael'thros told one of the teachers. "Knowledge is survival," the teacher replied. "We teach our children to be ready for whatever life brings them." Everything about human society seemed focused on preparation and readiness. They planned for disasters that might never happen and trained for situations that seemed impossible. Kael'thros found it interesting but unnecessary under Vetharian protection. The humans also had strange cultural practices. They held regular meetings where they discussed plans and shared information with the entire population. Everyone had a voice, from the youngest adult to the oldest elder. Decisions were made by consensus after long discussions. "This seems very slow," Kael'thros observed after attending one of these meetings. "Vetharian commanders make decisions quickly and efficiently." "Quick decisions are not always the best decisions," Jiho explained. "When everyone understands the plan, everyone can help make it work." Captain Velthar visited the new Sol occasionally to check on progress. He was pleased with how smoothly things were going. The humans provided detailed reports on their activities, shared their research data as agreed, and caused no problems for the protection fleet. "They are model clients," Captain Velthar told Kael'thros during one visit. "Peaceful, cooperative, and grateful for our help. I wish all species were this easy to manage." Kael'thros agreed, though he sometimes felt like he was missing something important about the humans. They were too perfect, too well organized, and too prepared for things that should not concern refugees under protection. Their ship's design bothered him the most. The new Soul looked like a colony vessel from the outside, but the internal layout was strange. Corridors were wider than necessary, allowing quick movement of large groups. Critical systems were protected by multiple barriers and backup power sources. Storage areas were positioned strategically throughout the ship. "Why did you build your ship this way?" he asked Sumi during one of their engineering tours. "Efficiency," she replied simply. "We wanted to make sure everything would work properly during the long journey to find a new home." The answer made sense, but something about her tone suggested there was more to it. Kael'thros decided not to push for more details. The humans had been honest about everything else, so why would they lie about ship design? Late one evening, while reviewing daily reports in his quarters, Kael'thros received an urgent message from the Vetharian fleet. Long-range sensors had detected something approaching their position. Multiple ships moving fast, with energy signatures that matched known hostile forces. The message was marked with the highest priority warning codes. Kael'thros felt his blood turn cold as he read the details. 27 heavy destroyers and 1 battle cruiser, all bearing the markings of the Korthak Void Reapers. The Korthak were the most feared raiders in this part of the galaxy. They had destroyed entire civilizations and never left survivors. Their ships were powerful, their crews were ruthless, and their reputation for brutality was known across a dozen sectors. The Vetharian protection fleet had 8 ships total. They were outnumbered more than 3-1 against an enemy that had never been defeated in open battle. Kael'thros immediately contacted Captain Velthar on the Star Whisper. The captain's face appeared on the communication screen, his expression grim. "How long until they reach us?" Kael'thros asked. 6 hours, maybe 7, Captain Velthar replied. "I am ordering immediate evacuation of the human ship. We will take as many as we can aboard the fleet and retreat to friendly space." "What about the ones we cannot evacuate?" Captain Velthar's expression grew harder. "That is unfortunate, but acceptable losses. The Confederation cannot risk 8 warships to save refugees. We will save who we can and leave the rest." Kael'thros felt sick, but he understood the logic. Military doctrine was clear: preserve valuable assets, sacrifice what must be sacrificed. The new Soul was large and slow. It could not escape, and it could not fight. He would have to tell the humans that most of them were going to die. Kael'thros stood outside the door to the human command center, trying to find the right words. How do you tell 50,000 people that they are about to be abandoned to die? How do you explain that their lives are worth less than 8 Vetharian warships? He pressed the door control and stepped inside. Captain Jiho Kim was studying star charts with his senior officers. Sumi Park looked up from a technical display, while Daeho Lee turned from a communication panel. Minji Choi was reviewing medical supply reports. "We need to talk," Kael'thros said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he had to share. Jiho gestured to a chair. "What is it?" "Long-range sensors have detected a Korthak raiding fleet approaching our position. 27 destroyers and a battle cruiser. They will be here in 6 hours. The humans exchanged glances, but no one seemed surprised or panicked. Kael'thros found their calm reaction strange. "The Void Reapers," Daeho said quietly. "We have heard of them?" "Captain Velthar is ordering immediate evacuation," Kael'thros continued. "The Vetharian fleet will take as many of your people as possible and retreat to safe space. I am sorry, but we cannot save everyone. The ships simply do not have enough room." Jiho was quiet for a long moment, studying the star charts. Then he looked up at Kael'thros with those dark eyes that seemed older than they should be. "How many can you evacuate?" Jiho asked. "Maybe 10,000, if we pack people into every available space." The military ships were not designed to carry large numbers of civilians. "So 40,000 will die," Sumi said. It was not a question. "I am sorry," Kyle Thros repeated. There is no other choice. The Korthak have never been defeated in battle. They destroy everything they encounter. Jiho stood up and walked to the large display screen that showed their position in space. The approaching Korthak fleet appeared as red dots moving steadily toward them. Thank you for the offer, Jiho said finally, but we will not be evacuating anyone. Kale Thros was confused. I do not understand. Do you not grasp the situation? The Korthak will kill everyone aboard this ship. We understand perfectly, Jiho said, his voice calm and steady. We are choosing to stay and fight. Fight? Kale Thros could not believe what he was hearing. You have one ship with primitive weapons against a fleet that has conquered 17 civilizations. It would be suicide. Maybe, Minji said. But it would be our choice. Jiho turned back to face Kale Thros. You can tell Captain Velthar that we appreciate everything the Confederation has done for us. We release him from any obligation to protect us. The Vetharian fleet should retreat to safety. You cannot be serious, Kale Thros protested. Your people will die for nothing. At least let us save the children and the elderly. Our people stay together, Jiho said firmly. All of us, or none of us. Kale Thros contacted Captain Velthar immediately, explaining the situation. The captain's response was swift and angry. They are refusing evacuation? Then activate the emergency protocols. Use tractor beams to force compliance. The Vetharian ships moved into position around the new Sol and began extending tractor beam locks. These powerful devices could override any ship's engines and drag it along with the fleet. Nothing happened. Sir? Came a confused voice from the Star Whisper's engineering section. The tractor beams are not working. The human ship is somehow jamming our signals. Kale Thros watched in amazement as the new Sol began to change. Panels along the hull slid open, revealing weapon ports that had been hidden beneath the outer plating. The ship's configuration shifted as sections rotated and locked into new positions. What is happening to your ship? He asked Jiho. We are preparing for battle, Jiho replied simply. Through the viewing ports, Kyle Thros could see human crew members moving with quick efficiency through the corridors. They were no longer wearing simple work clothes. Now they wore what looked like military uniforms and carried weapons that seemed much more advanced than the primitive projectile rifles he had seen before. Sumi's fingers flew across control panels, activating systems that had been dormant since Kale Thros first came aboard. Reactor output increasing to full combat power, she reported. All weapon systems coming online. Shield generators at maximum efficiency. This is impossible, Kale Thros said. Your ship is a refugee vessel, not a warship. Our ship is whatever we need it to be, Jiho replied while checking weapon status. Reports. Captain Velthar's voice came through the communication system, angry and frustrated. Kyle Thros, what is going on over there? Our sensors are reading massive energy increases from the human ship. They are preparing to fight the Korthak, Kyle Thros replied. There was a long silence before Captain Velthar responded. Tell them they have 15 minutes to come to their senses. After that, the fleet retreats with or without them. Jiho had overheard the conversation. Kale Thros, you should return to your ship. This is not your fight. I am a liaison officer, Kale Thros said. My duty is to remain with the humans until this situation is resolved. Your duty is to survive, Minji said while preparing medical stations for what was clearly going to be a battle. We cannot guarantee your safety if you stay. Kale Thros looked around the command center. These humans were preparing for a fight they could not possibly win, but they showed no fear. They worked with calm efficiency, checking systems and coordinating preparations like they had done this many times before. How is this possible? He asked. Where did these weapons come from? Why was your ship designed like this? Jiho paused in his work and looked at the Vetharian officer. Kale Thros, What do you know about human history? Very little. You said you were refugees seeking new opportunities. That is true, but not complete. We are refugees because Earth became too dangerous to live on. We left because staying meant dying in wars that would never end. Sumi spoke without looking, up from her controls. Humans have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We got very good at it. The new Sol was built to look like a colony ship, Deho explained, but it was designed by people who understood that space is dangerous and that sometimes you have to fight to survive. 15 minutes later, Captain Velthar made his decision. The Vetharian fleet began moving away from the human ship, accelerating toward the edge of the system. Then something unexpected happened. Captain Velthar's voice came across all communication channels. All ships, halt retreat. We will stand with the humans. Kael'thros was shocked. Captain, the military doctrine clearly states, military doctrine did not account for allies who choose death over abandonment, Captain Velthar replied. The Confederation has honor codes older than our military manuals. We will not leave brave warriors to die alone. The Vetharian fleet took position alongside the new Sol, forming a battle line in space. 8 advanced warships and 1 disguised human vessel, facing an enemy that had never known defeat. Jiho looked at Kael'thros with something that might have been respect. Your captain is an honorable warrior. He is also probably insane, Kael'thros replied. Sanity is overrated, Deho said while running final weapon checks. Besides, we might surprise you. As the Korthak fleet approached, Kael'thros realized he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time, someone was going to fight the Void Reapers in open battle. He just hoped someone would survive to remember what happened. The Korthak fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of deadly insects. Kael'thros watched the main display screen as 27 massive destroyers and 1 enormous battle cruiser appeared in perfect formation. Each ship was dark metal covered, with weapon ports and sensor arrays. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never met meaningful resistance. My God, whispered Lieutenant Vextar from the scanning station aboard the Star Whisper. They are even bigger than the reports, said. The largest Korthak ship was over 5 kilometers long and bristled with plasma cannons that could melt asteroids. The destroyers were smaller, but still twice the size of the heaviest Vetharian warship. Together, they represented enough firepower to destroy entire planets. Kael'thros had returned to the Star Whisper at Captain Velthar's order, but he remained linked to the new Sol's communication systems. He could hear the human crew preparing for battle with the same calm efficiency they brought to everything else. All sections report ready for combat, came Deho's voice across the human communication channels. Weapons loaded and standing by. Engineering. Reports full power to all systems, Sumi added. Reactor output is stable at maximum capacity. Medical teams are in position, Minji said. All trauma centers are prepared to receive casualties. The Korthak fleet did not bother with communication or warnings. They simply began accelerating toward the small group of defending ships, spreading out into attack formation. These were raiders who took what they wanted and destroyed everything else. All ships prepare for combat, Captain Velthar ordered across the Vetharian fleet channels. Target the nearest destroyers and concentrate fire for maximum effect. What happened next defied every tactical manual Kael'thros had ever studied. Instead of waiting for the enemy to close distance or forming defensive positions, the new Sol suddenly accelerated directly toward the center of the Korthak fleet. The massive ship moved faster than should have been possible for something its size. What are they doing? Captain Velthar demanded. That is suicide! The human ship's acceleration was incredible. Kael'thros watched the readings in amazement as the new Sol reached speeds that should have torn the vessel apart. Somehow, the internal structure held together. Jiho, your ship cannot handle that acceleration, Kael'thros said over the communication link. You will kill everyone aboard. Our ship is stronger than it looks, came Jiho's calm reply. Beginning attack run. The new Soul fired its first salvo while still accelerating toward the enemy fleet. Kale Thros expected to see primitive projectile weapons or simple energy beams. Instead, he watched dozens of advanced missiles streak away from the human ship. These were not the crude weapons he had observed during training exercises. The missiles moved with intelligence, adjusting course to avoid defensive fire and adapting their approach patterns in real time. When they reached their targets, the explosions were devastating. 3 Korthak destroyers simply disappeared in brilliant flashes of light. 2 more suffered massive hull breaches and began venting atmosphere into space. In 30 seconds, the humans had crippled nearly a quarter of the enemy's escort ships. "How is that possible?" Lieutenant Vextar gasped. The Korthak response was swift and brutal. Energy beams that could cut through battleship armor lanced out from the remaining destroyers. The space around the new Soul filled with plasma fire and high-energy particles. Kale Thros expected the human ship to be destroyed instantly. Instead, he watched in amazement as defensive systems he had never seen before activated around the vessel. The energy beams struck barriers that somehow absorbed or deflected the incoming fire. "Hull damage to Sections 7 and 12, came Deho's report over the human communication channels. His voice was as calm as if he were reporting the weather. "Sealing blast doors and rerouting life support." "How are you surviving that bombardment?" Kyle Thros asked. "Better shields than we advertised," Sumi replied while managing the ship's defensive systems. "And better armor underneath." The Vetharian fleet joined the battle, launching their own attacks against the Korthak destroyers. Their advanced plasma weapons and photon torpedoes struck the enemy ships with devastating effect. But the Korthaks were experienced fighters, and they began concentrating their fire on the smaller Vetharian vessels. The battlecruiser Brightclaw took a direct hit from 3 destroyers simultaneously. Its shields failed and the hull cracked open like a broken egg. Atmosphere and debris spilled into space as the crew fought to maintain life support. "Brightclaw is badly damaged," Captain Velthar reported. "They are requesting permission to retreat for repairs." "Negative," came an unexpected voice over the communication channels. It was Jiho. "Medical ship Star Whisper. Prepare to receive casualties. Brightclaw, maintain position and continue firing." "The humans do not give orders." "To the Confederation fleet," Captain Velthar said angrily. "Today we all give orders to whoever can help," Jiho replied. "Sumi, switch to kinetic penetrators. Their shields are adapting to our energy weapons." The new Soul changed its attack pattern without hesitation. New weapons emerged from hidden ports along the ship's hull. These fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds, punching through Korthak shields like they were made of paper. Kale Thros realized that everything he had seen during the past 3 months had been an act. The humans had been hiding their true capabilities from the very beginning. Their ship was not a refugee vessel with basic defensive systems. It was a warship designed to look helpless while carrying enough firepower to fight an entire fleet. "You lied to us?" he said over the communication link. "We never lied," Jiho replied, while coordinating the continuing attack. "We just did not tell you everything. There is a difference." A group of Korthak fighters broke away from the main fleet and headed directly for the new Soul. These smaller ships were fast and heavily armed, designed to get close to enemy vessels and tear them apart with short-range weapons. Kyle Thros expected the humans to fall back or call for help. Instead, defensive turrets emerged from positions all along the ship's hull. The humans had been hiding not just heavy weapons, but an entire point defense system. The Korthak fighters ran into a wall of projectile fire that destroyed them before they could get within attack range. The debris field from their destroyed ships spread across space like metallic snow. "Sumi, how much ammunition do we have left?" Jiho asked. "Enough," came the engineer's confident reply. "I designed our supply storage for extended combat operations." The largest Korthak ship, The battlecruiser at the center of their formation began moving toward the human vessel. This ship was a monster, armed with weapons that could destroy cities and protected by shields that had never been penetrated. All ships, concentrate fire on the battlecruiser, Captain Velthar ordered. The combined Vetharian fleet launched everything they had at the massive Korthak ship. Energy beams, plasma bolts, and photon torpedoes struck its shields in a continuous barrage. The defensive barriers flickered and sparked, but held against the assault. "Their shields are too strong," reported the commander of the Vetharian destroyer Swiftblade. "Our weapons cannot penetrate." "Maybe yours cannot," Sumi said over the communication channels, "but we have something special prepared for big targets." The New Soul changed course again, this time heading directly for the Korthak battlecruiser. The human ship accelerated past safety limits, pushing its engines beyond what should have been possible. "What are you doing?" Kael'thros demanded. "Something we hoped we would never have to do," Jiho replied. "Sumi, initiate Protocol 7. Kael'thros had no idea what Protocol 7 meant, but the tone in Jiho's voice made his blood run cold. Whatever the humans were planning, it was going to be desperate and dangerous. The New Soul continued accelerating toward the enemy battle cruiser, building speed that would make impact catastrophic for both ships. The Korthak vessel fired everything it had at the approaching human ship, filling space with enough energy to destroy a small moon. Somehow, the New Soul kept coming. The New Soul continued its impossible acceleration toward the Korthak battlecruiser, absorbing punishment that should have destroyed any ship. Kael'thros watched in horrified fascination as the human vessel pushed through a wall of energy fire that turned space itself into a blazing hell. "Protocol 7 initiated," Sumi reported, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Reactor containment systems disengaged. We have approximately 4 minutes before critical overload." Kael'thros finally understood what the humans were planning. They were going to ram the enemy flagship and detonate their own fusion reactor on impact. It was the most insane tactical decision he had ever witnessed. "You will kill everyone aboard your ship," he said over the communication link. "Not everyone," Jiho replied calmly. "Evacuation pods are launching now. Some of our people will survive." Through the sensor displays, Kael'thros could see small escape pods ejecting from the New Soul. Hundreds of them scattered in all directions, carrying precious human lives away from the doomed ship. But the vast majority of the 50,000 people aboard had no way to escape. "Medical teams, prepare for emergency pod recovery," Minji's voice came across the channels. "All personnel not essential to the attack should evacuate immediately." But most of the humans were not evacuating. They remained at their posts, continuing to fight even as their ship prepared for its final mission. Engineers kept the reactor stable for as long as possible. Gunners continued firing at enemy targets. Medical teams treated wounded crew members, who refused to abandon their duties. The Korthak battlecruiser realized what was happening and began evasive maneuvers. The massive ship tried to change course, but it was too large and slow to avoid the approaching human vessel. Smaller Korthak ships moved to intercept, trying to destroy the New Soul before it could reach its target. All Vetharian ships, protect. "The human attack run," Captain Velthar ordered. "Clear the path for them." The remaining Vetharian vessels threw themselves between the New Soul and the intercepting Korthak destroyers. The battle became a desperate melee as ships fired at point-blank range, trading devastating blows in a fight that could only end with total destruction. The destroyer Swiftblade took 3 direct hits while covering the human ship's approach. Its captain, Commander Zektar, reported massive damage to all systems before his ship exploded in a brilliant flash. 23 Vetharian warriors died in that moment, giving their lives to protect humans they had known for only 3 months. Korthak boarding pods somehow managed to penetrate the New Soul's defenses during the chaos. The armored cylinder smashed through the hull and began disgorging enemy warriors into the human ship's corridors. Kael'thros had seen Korthak soldiers before in recorded battles. They were 9 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating and armed with weapons that could cut through steel. They fought with savage brutality and had never been defeated in close combat. Through the security camera feeds, he watched Daeho Lee lead 12 human crew members to intercept the borders. The humans carried their simple projectile weapons and improvised explosives. They looked pathetically small compared to the armored giants they were about to face. What happened next would haunt Kael'thros for the rest of his life. The humans did not fight with honor or glory. They fought with cold, methodical violence that treated their own lives as acceptable losses in service of the mission. They used ambush tactics, improvised weapons, and when cornered, they fought with bare hands against claws and fangs. Daeho shot 2 Korthak warriors with his rifle, then detonated an explosive charge that brought down a section of corridor ceiling on a third enemy. When his weapon ran out of ammunition, he attacked the nearest Korthak with a metal bar torn from a damaged wall panel. A human engineer named Taejin Ko found himself cornered with 2 Korthak soldiers between him and the ship's reactor core. Without hesitation, he activated an emergency explosive device attached to his work vest. The blast killed all 3 of them, but saved the reactor from being damaged. His last words over the communication system were simple. "Tell my daughter, I kept my promise." The humans who survived the boarding action did not celebrate or rest. They immediately began repairing damage and preparing for the next wave of attackers. They treated their dead comrades with respect, but did not let grief slow them down. How can they keep fighting after losing friends like that? Kael'thros asked, his voice shaking. Because stopping means everyone dies, Minji replied while treating wounded humans in a medical bay. When your family is in danger, you do whatever is necessary. The new Soul was less than 30 seconds from impact with the Korthak battle. Cruiser when the human ship began its final attack. Every remaining weapon fired simultaneously, striking the enemy vessel's shields with concentrated fury. The defensive barriers finally collapsed under the massive assault. Reactor overload in 10 seconds, Sumi reported. All remaining crew brace for impact. Kael'thros watched through the sensor displays as the new Soul, traveling at nearly the speed of light, struck the Korthak battlecruiser amidships. The collision was followed instantly by the detonation of the human ship's fusion reactor. The explosion was visible across 3 star systems. When the energy blast finally faded, both ships were gone. In their place was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma that glowed like a newborn star. The remaining Korthak destroyers, stunned by the loss of their flagship, began to retreat. These were raiders who preyed on the weak, not warriors prepared to die for their cause. They had never encountered an enemy willing to trade their lives for victory. "Sir," came a shaken voice from the Star Whisper's sensor station, "the Korthak fleet is withdrawing from the system." For the first time in recorded history, the Void Reapers had been defeated. They fled from a battle, leaving their dead behind, and abandoning their plans for conquest. But the cost of victory made Kael'thros feel sick. The new Soul was destroyed. 47,000 humans had died in the battle. The rescue pods contained only 3,000 survivors from the original 50,000 refugees. As the Vetharian ships began recovering human escape pods, Kael'thros found himself crying. He had never shed tears for alien casualties before, but something about the human sacrifice touched him deeply. "They knew this would happen," he said to Captain Velthar. "They planned from the beginning to die fighting rather than accept defeat." "Yes," Captain Velthar replied quietly. "And they made sure some of their people would survive to continue their journey. The rescued humans were brought aboard the Vetharian ships, where they were given medical care and temporary quarters. Despite their losses, they showed no signs of despair or defeat. They began immediately planning how to rebuild their community and continue their mission to find a new home." Thros visited the survivors in their temporary quarters aboard the Star Whisper. He found Minji Choi treating injured humans with the same calm efficiency she had always shown. She had been working for 18 hours straight without rest. "You should sleep," he told her. "You have done enough." Minji looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than before. "They trusted me to bring them home. I do not sleep until everyone is home." That night, Thros lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what he had witnessed. The humans had not won through superior technology or greater numbers. They had won by being willing to pay a price their enemies would not consider. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what fear meant. Not the fear of death or defeat, but the fear of fighting an enemy that viewed their own extinction as an acceptable price for your destruction. The aftermath of the battle felt worse than the fighting itself. Thros walked through the temporary quarters where human survivors had been housed aboard the Vetharian ships, and the weight of what had happened pressed down on him like a physical force. 3,000 humans had survived out of 50,000. In any other context, this would be considered an acceptable loss rate for a military engagement. Armies throughout the galaxy regularly suffered casualties of 10 or 20% and considered themselves fortunate, but the humans did not see it that way. Every survivor knew the name of every person who had died. They did not just mourn their dead as numbers on a casualty report. They carried them as individuals, as family members, as friends whose specific contributions to their community could never be replaced. Thros found Sumi Park in the engineering section of the Star Whisper, working with Vetharian technicians to design temporary living spaces for her people. She had been awake for 26 hours straight, but her hands remained steady as she calculated resource requirements and structural modifications. "You should rest," Thros told her. "The work will still be here tomorrow." Sumi looked up from her calculations with eyes that were red from exhaustion but still focused. "Rest is a luxury for people who have homes to return to. We have work to do." The human survivors had immediately begun planning for their future. They held meetings to decide how to distribute the limited resources available to them. They organized work teams to help maintain the Vetharian ships that had taken them in. They established schools for their children using storage compartments and cargo bays. Most remarkably, they began planning their next colony ship. Using salvaged materials and Vetharian assistance, they intended to build a new vessel that could carry their reduced population to a suitable world for settlement. "How can you think about the future after losing so many people?" Thros asked Jiho, who was reviewing star charts in what had become the temporary human command center. "Because that is what the dead would want us to do," Jiho replied simply. "They died so we could continue. Stopping now would make their sacrifice meaningless." The survivors worked with the same methodical efficiency they had always shown, but there was a weight to their actions now that had not been there before. They moved like people carrying invisible burdens, honoring obligations to those who could no longer speak for themselves. Minji Choi had finally been convinced to sleep, but only after treating every injured survivor and organizing medical care, protocols for the journey ahead. When she woke 8 hours later, she immediately returned to work, checking on patients and training Vetharian medical staff in human physiology. "Your people are remarkable," Dr. Veltar, the Star Whisper's chief medical officer, told Thros. "I have never seen anyone maintain such discipline after experiencing trauma like this." But Thros was beginning to understand that this was not discipline in the way Vetharians understood it. This was something deeper and more fundamental to human nature. They were not forcing themselves to continue despite their losses. They were continuing because of their losses. The conversation that changed everything happened 3 days after the battle. Thros was reviewing battle recordings with Captain Velthar, trying to understand exactly how the humans had hidden their true capabilities so effectively. Look at this, Captain Velthar said, pointing to a tactical display. Their weapons. Systems were deliberately programmed to fire at reduced power during training exercises. They made their ship appear weak on purpose. Kyle Thros studied the data more carefully. What he found made his blood turn cold. During the battle, when several Vetharian ships had tried to retreat at the beginning of the engagement, the human weapon systems had locked onto them. For several seconds, the new Sol had the Vetharian fleet in its targeting computers. The weapons had been set to non-lethal power levels. They could have destroyed us, Kale Thros whispered. At any time. During the past 3 months, they could have annihilated our entire fleet. Yes, Captain Velthar said grimly, and they chose not to. Even when we tried to abandon them, they protected us instead of taking revenge. This realization forced Kale Thros to reconsider everything he thought he understood about the humans. They had spent 3 months studying Vetharian technology, learning their capabilities, and observing their tactical procedures. At any point, they could have turned their hidden weapons on their supposed protectors. Instead, they had honored their agreements, shared their resources, and treated the Vetharians as genuine allies. Even when those allies prepared to abandon them to die, the humans had continued fighting to protect them. That evening, Kale Thros requested permission to access the human historical databases that had been recovered from the new Sol's computer systems. Captain Velthar granted the request, though he warned that some of the information might be disturbing. What Kale Thros found in those files was worse than any nightmare he could have imagined. Humans had been fighting continuously for their entire recorded history. Not just against alien threats or natural disasters, but against each other. They had perfected the art of warfare through 10,000 years of constant conflict between different groups of their own species. The records showed wars that had killed millions of people, battles that lasted for years, and weapons that could destroy entire cities. Humans had fought over territory, resources, ideology, and sometimes for no reason that Kale Thros could understand. The Titan Station incident that Daiho had mentioned was a battle during a human civil war where 30,000 people had died in 6 hours. The New Sol's crew were veterans of that conflict, and dozens of others like it. But the most disturbing part of the records was not the scale of human violence. It was how they had learned to control it. Humans had developed elaborate codes of conduct for warfare. They had created international laws to limit the suffering of civilians. They had built institutions to prevent conflicts and treaties to end them. They had learned to fight with devastating efficiency while still maintaining their humanity. The colony ships, like the New Sol, had not been sent out to explore the galaxy. They had been sent to preserve human civilization in case their species destroyed itself in a final war. Each ship carried a complete cross-section of human society, with all the knowledge and skills needed to rebuild their civilization on a distant world. "We have been preparing for a galaxy-ending war for 300 years, Jiho had told him during their conversation on the observation deck. "We hope it never comes. But if it does, some part of humanity will survive." Kyle Thros finally understood why the humans had been so perfectly organized, so well prepared, and so willing to sacrifice themselves for their community. They were not just refugees seeking a new home. They were the carefully selected survivors of a warrior species that had learned to channel its destructive capabilities toward protecting what it valued most. The next day, he found Jiho in the temporary workshop where human engineers were designing their new colony ship. The plans showed a vessel that looked like a peaceful transport, but was clearly designed for both defense and long-term survival. "You have been planning this from the beginning," Kale Thros said. "The hidden weapons, the combat training, the willingness to fight impossible odds. You knew something like this would happen." Jiho looked up from the design schematics. "Not specifically, but we know that space is dangerous, and that sometimes good people have to fight bad people. We prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And if the worst had been us?" Kale Thros asked. If the Vetharians had decided to enslave your people or take your ship by force? Jiho was quiet for a long moment before answering. Then we would have fought you too, and we would have won. The simple certainty in his voice was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Kael'thros spent the next 2 weeks studying human history with an obsession that worried his fellow officers. He read through thousands of documents, watched recorded battles, and analyzed tactical reports that stretched back centuries. The more he learned, the more disturbed he became. Every human aboard the New Soul had been a veteran of some conflict. Their civilian colony ship had been designed by people who understood that the universe was hostile and that sometimes survival required violence. Even their children were taught strategic thinking as part of basic education. "Sir, you have been in the archives for 14 hours straight," Lieutenant Vextar said, bringing Kael'thros a meal tray. "Perhaps you should rest." "Did you know that humans have never experienced true peace?" Kael'thros asked, without looking up from the display screen. "For their entire history, there has always been a war happening somewhere on their world." Lieutenant Vexatar looked confused. "That seems inefficient. How did they develop advanced technology while constantly fighting?" "That is just it," Kael'thros said, pulling up another file. "They developed their technology because they were constantly fighting. Every advancement was driven by military necessity. Their space program began as a way to deliver weapons across continents. The records painted a picture of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. Humans had fought with sticks and stones, then with metal blades, then with chemical explosives, and finally with weapons that could crack planets. Each generation had built upon the knowledge of the previous one, refining tactics and strategies through practical application. But they had also learned something that most warrior species never discovered: restraint. The human historical files contained detailed accounts of conflicts where they had deliberately chosen not to use their most destructive weapons. Wars that could have been ended quickly with maximum force were instead fought with careful limitations to reduce civilian casualties. "They have rules for their wars," Kael'thros explained to Captain Velthar during their daily briefing. "Codes of conduct that prevent them from targeting non-combatants, requirements to treat prisoners humanely, restrictions on certain types of weapons." "That sounds like weakness," Captain Velthar replied. "Warriors should use every advantage available to achieve victory." "I thought so too, but look at this." Kael'thros showed him recordings from human conflicts where these rules had been followed, even when it made victory more difficult. "They fight harder when they believe their cause is just. The restrictions do not make them weaker. They make them more dangerous." The conversation that changed everything happened when Jiho found Kael'thros in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The human leader had been coordinating the construction of their new ship, but he took time to check on the Vetharian officer who had become obsessed with understanding his people. "You have been reading our history," Jiho said, sitting down beside him. "Yes, it is..." Kael'thros struggled to find the right words. "Terrifying." "Good. You should be terrified, but not because we want to hurt you." Kael'thros turned to look at the human. "Then why?" "Because we are very, very good at hurting people when we have to be," Jiho said quietly. "And we have spent thousands of years learning when we have to be." The observation deck was quiet for several minutes. Outside the transparent aluminum windows, stars moved slowly past as the Vetharian fleet continued its journey toward friendly space. "Why did you hide this from us?" Kael'thros finally asked. "Why pretend to be helpless refugees when you could have demanded respect as warriors?" Jiho smiled, but there was sadness in his expression. "Because we hoped we would not need to fight. We have seen enough war, Kael'thros. We wanted to build something peaceful, but you were prepared for war anyway. Always. That is what keeps the peace, knowing that the cost of breaking it will be too high for anyone to accept. Jiho explained that Earth's colony ships were scattered across the galaxy not for exploration, but for species survival. Humans had learned that putting all their population in one place was a strategy for extinction. "We have been preparing for a galaxy-ending war for 300 years, Jiho said. "We hope it never comes. But if it does, some part of humanity will survive to rebuild. And if that war comes, you will fight it with the same tactics you used." "Against the Korthak?" "We will fight it to win," Jiho said simply. "Whatever that requires." The implications of this conversation kept Kyle Thros awake for days. He began to understand that the galaxy had been operating under false assumptions about the balance of power. Species like the Vetharians and the Korthak believed they were the apex predators because they had never encountered true human military capability. The colony ships were not helpless refugees seeking protection. They were military assets disguised as civilian vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy small fleets and the tactical knowledge to use it effectively. More importantly, they were connected. The human database contained communication, protocols that linked every colony ship in a vast network spanning hundreds of star systems. If threatened, they could coordinate their responses across galactic distances. "How many ships like the New Sol are there?" Kael'thros asked Sumi while she worked on the engineering plans for their replacement vessel. "Enough," she replied without looking up from her calculations. "That is not an answer." Sumi stopped working and looked at him directly. "No, it is not. And you should think carefully about why we choose not to give you that information." The message was clear. The humans trusted the Vetharians enough to work with them, but not enough to reveal the full scope of their capabilities. They maintained operational security even with their allies. That evening, Kael'thros made a decision that would change the course of his life. He requested a private meeting with Captain Velthar to discuss what he had learned about human capabilities and the implications for Vetharian military doctrine. "Sir, we need to completely revise our understanding of galactic power structures," he began. "The humans are not a minor species seeking protection. They are potentially the most dangerous military force in known space." Captain Velthar listened carefully as Kael'thros presented his analysis. The evidence was overwhelming. Humans had been preparing for interstellar warfare for centuries. Their technology was more advanced than they had revealed. Their tactical knowledge was based on thousands of years of practical combat experience. "What do you recommend?" Captain Velthar asked when the presentation was finished. "Alliance," Kael'thros said immediately. "Not protection, not domination, genuine partnership. We need them as allies more than they need us as protectors. And if they refuse?" Kael'thros remembered Jiho's quiet confidence when he said they would have fought the Vetharians if necessary. "Then we stay out of their way and hope they continue to view us as friends rather than threats." The meeting ended with Captain Velthar authorizing Kael'thros to begin drafting proposals for a new type of relationship between the Confederation and human colonies. Not the traditional protection agreements that assumed Vetharian superiority, but mutual defense treaties between equals. As Kael'thros worked on the proposals, he realized that the galaxy was about to experience a fundamental shift in the balance of power. For the first time, a species had appeared that could match or exceed traditional military powers while maintaining the discipline to use that power responsibly. The humans had introduced a new variable into galactic politics: the threat of acceptable losses. They did not win by being stronger than their enemies. They won by being willing to pay prices that others would not consider. And they had spent centuries learning exactly what prices they were willing to pay. 6 months after the battle with the Korthak, Kael'thros stood in the diplomatic chambers of the Vetharian High Council on their capital world. The chamber was filled with the most powerful military and political leaders in Confederation space, all listening to his report about humanity with expressions that ranged from fascination to terror. The evidence is undeniable, Thros concluded his presentation. Humans represent a fundamental shift in galactic power structures. They possess military capabilities that match or exceed our own, combined with tactical knowledge gained from millennia of warfare experience. Admiral Zek Tool, the eldest member of the council, leaned forward in his chair. You are saying that these refugees could have destroyed our protection fleet at any time? Yes, sir. And they chose not to, even when we prepared to abandon them to the Korthak. The council chamber was silent for several long moments. These were leaders who had built their careers on the assumption that Vetharian military might was supreme in their region of space. The idea that a species of apparent refugees could have annihilated them was difficult to accept. What do they want from us? Asked General Vex Mora, head of military planning. Nothing we are not already willing to give, Thros replied. Trade relationships, peaceful coexistence, and mutual defense agreements. They do not seek to conquer or dominate. They simply want to be left alone to build their colonies. And if we refuse? Admiral Zektul asked. Thros remembered his conversations with Jiho and the quiet certainty in the human leader's voice. Then they will defend themselves. And based on what I have seen, that defense will be more effective than any attack we could mount. The Council voted unanimously to authorize new diplomatic initiatives with human colonies throughout their territory. Traditional protection agreements would be replaced with mutual defense treaties. Trade relationships would be established on equal terms. Most importantly, the Confederation would publicly acknowledge humans as allies rather than clients. Word of the Confederation's new policies spread quickly through galactic communication networks. Other species took notice when the most powerful military force in the region began treating refugees as equals. The Korthak, still nursing their unprecedented defeat, spread warnings through the criminal underworld. The humans were not prey. They were predators disguised as harmless creatures, and the cost of threatening them was unacceptable. 3 weeks later, Thros received authorization to return to the human colony fleet as the first Vetharian ambassador to humanity. He found the survivors had completed construction of their new ship, the New Busan, which was even more impressive than the original New Soul. It looks like a colony vessel, he observed while touring the ship with Jiho. It is a colony vessel, Jiho replied with a slight smile. It also happens to be capable of defending itself if necessary. The new ship carried the 3,000 survivors plus additional refugees from other human colonies in the region. They had been joined by volunteers from several Vetharian colonies who wanted to participate in humanity's peaceful expansion across the galaxy. Sumi Park had been promoted to chief engineer for the entire human colonial fleet in their sector. Her first project was designing communication systems that would allow real-time coordination between human colonies across hundreds of light years. For defensive purposes only, of course, she told Thros while showing him the specifications. Of course, he agreed, though they both understood the implications of such a network during wartime. Daeho Lee now served as security coordinator for multiple human colonies, sharing tactical knowledge and training procedures that had proven effective against superior forces. His students included both humans and several species that had requested assistance with their own defense planning. Minji Choi had established mobile medical facilities that could respond to emergencies across human space. Her teams were trained to handle everything from natural disasters to combat casualties, and they shared their knowledge freely with allied species. The changes were not limited to military and political relationships. Human colonies began sharing their technology and cultural innovations with other species. Their agricultural techniques increased food production on dozens of worlds. Their educational systems were adopted by species seeking to improve their own societies. Most importantly, they introduced the concept of controlled warfare to species that had never considered it possible. The idea that violence could be regulated, limited, and directed toward specific objectives rather than total destruction was revolutionary for many galactic civilizations. 6 months later, Calthros attended a conference on the neutral world of Kepler Station, where representatives from 47 species gathered to discuss new approaches to interstellar conflict resolution. The conference had been suggested by human diplomats, but it was hosted by traditional powers to avoid any appearance of human dominance. The discussions centered around what became known as the human doctrine, the principle that military force should be used to minimize casualties while achieving strategic objectives rather than to inflict maximum damage on enemies. It is a completely different way of thinking about warfare, explained Ambassador Veltara of the Rigelian Republic. Instead of asking, how can we destroy our enemies? They ask, how can we convince our enemies that continuing to fight is not worth the cost? The doctrine spread rapidly among species that had grown tired of the constant cycle of violence that characterized galactic politics. Wars became shorter and less destructive as combatants adopted human-inspired tactics focused on strategic objectives rather than total victory. The Korthak Void Reapers found themselves increasingly isolated as their traditional prey adopted defensive strategies based on human military theory. Several raiding fleets were destroyed by coordinated responses from species that had previously been easy targets. 2 years after the battle that changed everything, Calthros was promoted to Director of Interspecies Relations for the Vetharian Confederation. His first major initiative was the establishment of a galactic peacekeeping force based on human principles of limited warfare and proportional response. The force was voluntary and included representatives from dozens of species. Its mission was not to impose peace through superior firepower, but to provide assistance to civilizations seeking to resolve conflicts without resorting to total war. The headquarters was established on a human colony world, staffed jointly by human and allied personnel. The symbolism was intentional. The galaxy's newest military power was choosing to lead through example rather than domination. On the 5th anniversary of the battle with the Korthak, Calthros stood in the memorial garden that the new Busan's crew had built to honor their dead. 47,000 names were inscribed on a curved wall of black stone, each one representing a life given to protect others. Jiho found him there, as he often did when visiting the human colonies. The human leader was older now, with gray, streaking his black hair, but his eyes remained as sharp and determined as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Calthros asked. "The sacrifice, the losses, the price you paid for victory?" Jiho was quiet for a long moment, reading the names on the memorial wall. "Every day," he said finally. "But regret is different from thinking it was wrong. They died so their children could live in a galaxy where strength is used to protect, rather than to prey upon the weak. And has that goal been achieved?" "It is being achieved," Jiho corrected. "Change takes time, especially change that challenges fundamental assumptions about how power should be used." As they stood in the memorial garden, Calthros reflected on how much had changed since that first day when he had dismissed humans as harmless refugees. The galaxy had not become peaceful. That was probably impossible, given the nature of different species and their competing interests. But it had become more just. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation more often than warfare. When fighting did occur, it was limited in scope and directed toward specific objectives. The weak were no longer automatically prey for the strong. Most importantly, the galaxy had learned a new kind of fear. Not the fear of superior technology or greater numbers, but the fear of fighting an enemy that would accept any cost to protect what they valued. Humans had introduced a simple but revolutionary concept to galactic politics, making victory cost more than defeat. That evening, Calthros completed his final report on human integration into galactic civilization. The conclusion was simple. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through superior force, but had transformed it through superior principles. Personal log, Kael'thros, Director of Interspecies Relations, he dictated to his recording system. I fought beside humans today, and I learned the true meaning of fear. Not the fear of death or defeat, but the fear of fighting an enemy that views their own extinction as an acceptable price for your destruction. The humans have a saying, peace through superior firepower. I thought I understood it when I first heard it. I was wrong. It is not about having better weapons or stronger ships. It is about being willing to use them when others will not. It is about making your enemies ask themselves a single question. Is this worth it? Today, I watched 3,000 humans make an entire galaxy decide it was not worth it.